Hello, I'm Stacey, and this is the Service Design Show, episode 237.
We often have a difficult relationship with numbers and KPIs in the world of service design. They can feel rigid, random, and often disconnected from our real work. It's so challenging that many of us just give up on measurement altogether. But what if that's the very thing that's holding us back from having the influence that we want to have? Hi, if you're new here, welcome to the Service Design Show, where we invite the brightest minds in our field and explore what's truly needed to design great services that resonate with people, push businesses forward, and most of all, honor our planet. Our guest today might not have design in her job title, but as she says herself, her work is indeed a form of service design. She designs ways for people and organizations to build a better, more productive relationship with measurement. Stacey Barr is a renowned performance measurement expert whose career changed the moment she realized that every organization needs a unique set of measures, but they all need the same exact approach. Today, she's going to share that proven approach with us so we can stop avoiding numbers and start using them as the leverage we need to make real impact. In today's conversation, you are going to learn about the way to set meaningful targets that aren't just random numbers pulled from thin air, how to measure your team's impact when it spans across multiple departments and silos, a method for shifting conversations from a just ship it mentality to focusing on real impact, what you can do to create alignment when you don't own the goals you're working on, and a practical framework for mapping how your works connect to the larger strategic objectives. What I found most valuable in this conversation is the powerful idea of starting small. We often feel we need this massive, perfect system to measure everything. But focusing on getting just one goal right might just be the most strategic thing you can actually do. It's not about building a giant dashboard. It's about building the muscle and momentum to create a lasting change. So whether you are leading a new initiative or feeling stuck on how to prove your worth, this conversation offers a clear and practical starting point. Okay, I'm really excited to share this one with you. So let's get into the conversation with Stacey to find that leverage we are all looking for. And make sure you stick around for my closing thoughts at the very end. I am your host, Mark Fontijn, and this is the Service Design Show. Welcome back to the show, Stacey.
Hi, Mark. Thanks.
I'm excited to have you on. The reason why you are back is that I reached out and said you were the most popular or most listened to episode out of all the episodes in 2024. What do you feel about that, your previous appearance on the Service Design Show?
I have two strong emotions. One is surprise, because it's measurement, right? So who would have thought? And the other is I'm just really happy about that. I think it's such an important thing for people to understand because it has such great leverage. So I'm thrilled that people want to learn more about it.
Yeah, so you're coming in into this space of service design from I would say, a completely different angle, maybe a surprising angle. You don't have necessarily design background, or design isn't in your job title. How would you describe yourself? Like, what is your expertise for anyone who hasn't listened to episode number 1?
Well, strangely, that since episode number 1, and the more I think about it in a service design concept, it kind of is service design. I guess I'm designing ways to help people develop a better relationship with measuring as the leverage to achieve their goals, to get their strategy executed. And that is relevant in absolutely every type of organization or function or profession around the world. And service design is no exception. So maybe I understand a little more about service design than I probably would have first thought, because that's what I'm trying to do,
Yeah.
is design ways for people to be able to do this for themselves.
And I think as we concluded at the end of our first conversation, um, your approach and the methodology that you propose has a lot of similarities with how we approach the design process. So for me, it's very much a design oriented, design driven approach that you propose. So, which is great. The thing that's maybe a bit weird or odd or left field is that we're going to talk about measuring stuff, about goals, about key performance indicators, all those things that seem quite challenging, gnarly. Often we try to avoid these things. Complicated. We have like a difficult relationship with numbers in the service design space. But you're here to help us sort of navigate that and become friends with numbers and measurements and KPIs, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and not in the way that you'd expect. It's not about, here, meet this number, you're going to love it. It's a little bit different.
We'll see. Okay. Um, So you're also developing a new program to guide professionals like us through this approach. We'll talk about that later in the episode. But like, let's start at the beginning. And I'm curious, like, if you had to sort of help us understand what makes it so challenging, you think, for a service design profession to work with goals, with measurements? What are some common pitfalls that you see there?
There are kind of four pieces to the equation for anyone to achieve a goal through measurement. There, and those four pieces are the goals themselves. Another piece is the measures, obviously. Then there are targets, and then there are actions. And those four things work together to help us stay focused on the right goal, to know what progress we're making, and to choose the right actions to achieve it. But those terms get very mixed up and muddled. And I think that's part of the challenge in trying to get it to all work. For example, goals, they are often confused with actions. So there might be a service design goal to launch 3 new services by the end of the year. It's not a goal, it's an action. It doesn't describe any kind of impact that we're trying to create, any kind of result that we're trying to get better at. That's what powerful goals are. They are results. They describe an impact. We still need the actions, but we shouldn't confuse the goal with the action. Another confusion is that often measures, what a measure actually is, can be a little bit muddled. Um, some people write a target and think that, yeah, that's the measure, like improve service design value by 10%. Well, there's actually nothing measurable about that, even though there's a number in it.
Mm,
Um, Understanding that measures are very clear quantifications of something is really, really important before we even think about targets. So a well-designed measure has to come before the target. Um, Targets themselves are often a really uncomfortable thing to talk about, a very uncomfortable thing to set, because often they're just plucked out of thin air. If we haven't got a really well-designed measure, we need a target for this goal. Well, what will it be? So it becomes some random value. Um, and they're hard to commit to in that case, and we don't know if they're achievable or not. Targets are much more motivating when we know that they are in the context of where current performance actually
mm.
is. We need a measure to tell us that, because then we can decide how quickly we want to change it and by how much we want to change it. But we've got to know where we're starting from. Often targets are chosen without that knowledge. And of course, actions fit into this as well. But we jump to action way too quickly before we've really understood the goal, before we know how we're going to measure it. In other words, what direction are we wanting our action to push things, and how much we want to achieve the target, how big an elevation in performance we want. Actions only make sense and will only be really um, effective if we know those first 3 things, and then set the action. So yeah, the order in which we come up with these things really matters. Like, we've got to have a clear measurable goal first, then we can have a meaningful quantitative measure, and then We can know the baseline of performance and set an appropriate target. And then we know what performance gap we're trying to close, and therefore can be much more targeted in the actions that we choose to close those performance gaps.
That is like we could almost conclude our episode here, but we'll dive into how do we actually get there. I think that's a great summary. And yes, everybody jumps into solutions, into actions right away. Um, Numbers are getting plucked out of thin air, feel very random. I'm curious if you could take us, like, let's fast forward to a scenario, an ideal scenario where we do have all these things in place, well thought out. Like, what happens? What is the potential for us if we get this right?
Well, the potential is that we feel very clear and confident in the levers that we pull to get the results that we want in service design. There's not just one service design goal. There'll be several. There'll be several things we wish were better. We'll be in the future, we will be very clear about what we want to make better and why it's important, but we'll know what the levers are to pull to do it. And what I mean by that is, with our measures as like a guiding light for the kinds of changes we're trying to make, helps us do well thought through experiments that are going to shift things closer and closer to where we want them to be. We're just going to feel like we have much more influence and power over making changes. And because we're using the leverage of measurement, we're going to also get a bigger bang for our buck, because we've got to spend time to make changes so that service design's better. We've got to spend money, obviously, to make our service design better in whatever ways we define better. And with proper measurement, we're going to have a much greater success rate with the way we spend our time and money. We're going to get a bigger bang for that input.
Yeah, I feel empowerment, like you're feeling that you're actually contributing to something that's meaningful. You see the direction, yes. It makes sense. Like you actually do your work with more joy and pride. There are so many things I want to unpack here, but like goals, measures, targets, actions. Often, a lot of people who are responsible for actions are at the bottom of the food chain, like bottom of the organizational food chain. And you feel that there's a disconnect between the people who influence and set goals and the people who actually take actions. Like, how do you see that? Like, how does that work in your world?
How it should work or how it does work?
Well,
Two different
yeah,
things.
well, yeah.
How it tends to work is like you describe it, or I think you're getting at this disconnect between the goal setters and the people who are supposed to achieve them. And that shouldn't be that way. It is the way it is, but it shouldn't be that way. So the people that are tasked with achieving goals someone else has set, the very first thing I think that's going to help them is to talk with those people that set the goals, because generally goals are not written clearly enough just to be handed over to somebody and that somebody have a full understanding of what it means and how to achieve it. So having that conversation is important to get a bit more context about why that goal was set, what it really means to the person who set it, getting them to put some more language around what it looks like when it's achieved. And that's going to help the person who's got to take action to firstly have a better understanding of it, but secondly, possibly have a little bit more ownership of it now that they've got that deeper connection to why it's important. And then I think if the person tasked with achieving that goal is also tasked, which can be the case, with setting the measure for it and deciding what actions to take, then there needs to be, again, a little bit more collaboration. Like, sure, the person who's doing the action could start the work in designing a measure or whatever measures are needed, and start thinking about the data collection and the monitoring of it, and should then involve the owner of the goal, just to double check, we're thinking along the same lines here. So it's almost like talking about the goal and talking about the measure opens up that communication that should have been there in the first place, really. But often isn't. How this really should happen is that there should not be a separation between who sets the goal and who sets the measures and drives the action for it. Goals work best when they operate in let's say, a system, but by a system, I kind of mean a hierarchy, that there'll be strategic goals at the top of the organization, then there'll be some tactical goals that sit under those, and those goals are really the causal factors that help achieve the strategic goals. Then under those tactical goals, there might be some very operational goals that are the causal factors that help achieve the tactical goals. So they live in a system where they contribute to each other to ultimately get the big picture results that an organization wants. The thing is that very often the senior leaders will try to set all of the goals and then just hand them off to people. But really, it's the operational teams that should be choosing the operational goals by having an understanding of what the tactical
Mm.
goals are that they're contributing to. And the middle management would own the tactical goals, and they would own them and measure them and try to achieve them in the context of the strategic goals. So that's how it should be.
I guess a lot of your work also involves encouraging cultural change, and it requires a lot of trust. It requires some establishment about how we communicate, how we do things in the organization. I think that deserves its own episode to talk about company culture. Today, I guess maybe it's more interesting to get a bit more hands on into how we actually transform these vague, abstract, random, seemingly goals into something that we can actually use to feel more empowered, right? Or do you want to say something about company cultures?
There's a lot to say about company culture, but no, I think you're right. It's a different can of worms. But regardless of who owns the goal and how it came to be that somebody's got a goal that they've got to try and achieve, what we're about to talk about, what you suggest that we talk about now, is going to be just perfect.
Awesome. In that case, maybe we can talk through an example, a stereotypical example that hopefully everybody who's listening will recognize, and see how we move from something abstract, something intangible, to something more tangible.
Yeah, yeah,
Where should we
absolutely.
start?
Let's start with, because what we're starting with here, Mark, is starting with our goals. Even though we're supposed to be talking about measurement, you can't talk about measures until you've got goals that you know are measurable. And the two problems that goals will have that make them immeasurable or not easy to measure is when they're written like an action, like the example of earlier, like launch 3 services by the end of the year. It's just an action. If we've got an action, we've first got to figure out what the result is that we're aiming for.
So, Stacey,
So
can I interrupt you? So, is it an action because there's a verb in the goal, like launch?
no,
Okay,
no,
okay,
because every single goal pretty much could have a verb in it.
okay.
Improve something,
Mm-hmm.
make something, make something different. So the verb is not necessarily the trick. The trick is, can I see that happen as a set of tasks that's got a start date and an end date? That's probably the better way to say
Mm-hmm.
whether a goal is a. So launch 3 new services by the end of the year. There's actions. We're doing launching of 3 services, and we want it done by the end of the year. It's got a start and a finish. It's a confined thing. It's a thing that's being done. The other clue is it describing how some ongoing important result is going to be different in some way? No, it doesn't. That we can't see any kind of important result there at all. So that's the other clue that we don't have a result
Well, yeah,
oriented goal.
there's already friction here because I think there are a lot of cases where um, people work in a context where launching 3 actual services is the goal, and nobody really cares about the impact or the outcome, right?
That's just it. And you've got to care. If you don't care, then there's no point in having this conversation. There's
Mm,
no point measuring
mm,
anything. If you care about an impact, then we've got to start with that impact.
sure.
So, like, there are lots of reasons why we might decide we need to launch 3 new services by the end of the year. One of them might be that customers are just already saturated with the services that we currently have, and we have to get into a rhythm of launching new things. We've got to keep aligning our services with what the customer's needs are. So the impact is that we are ready with a new service when our customer has a new need. That is a much more, it's still not perfect, but it's a way of describing an impact. What is the one of the actions that we're going to do to try and improve that alignment of what we offer and what our customers need? Well, we're going to get into the habit of launching more services. In fact, let's kick off with launching 3 new services by the end of the year.
I guess that makes
Yeah.
sense. And this will and is a common frustration point where people just feel like they need to ship stuff for the sake of shipping stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what humans are like. We're activity junkies. That's why it's so easy for us just to get caught up in action all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Now what?
Yeah. So the second problem that can happen, even if you have a result-oriented goal, is that it could just be written too vaguely. So one example might be, we want to have more influence on business decisions. As service design professionals, we want to have more influence on business decisions, which sounds great, sounds really important, sounds like an
I'd sign up.
impact.
Yeah.
But what does it look like? What does influence actually mean? So we have to unpack influence because it's still a bit too vague to really know what change we're looking for. If we can't like bring it to life in our mind's eye, what it would look like or what it would sound like, then we haven't got a goal, because when it starts happening, we're not going to recognize it. What are we looking for?
Mm-hmm.
And what that really means is, if we don't know what we're looking for, we don't have any hope of being able to measure it meaningfully, because measures are built on the evidence that we see and touch and hear around us.
So what could be evidence in this example?
What does influence mean? What
Mm-hmm.
kind of influence do service design professionals want to have on business decisions? That's not something that I necessarily know. I'm hoping that you will have some thoughts on that, Mark.
Yeah. Well, I'd say they, for instance, would like to have their own budgets, which they can decide how to spend and
Yeah.
decide which investments are being made in which direction, in which tools, resources, people, stuff like that.
So there's a few different ways that we could take what you've just said, Mark, about that influence. It could be that a better, or what that goal actually means, a better way of saying that goal could be that business decisions take on service design priorities kind of before it's too late. I mean, even that's
Sure.
not good, but
Well, yeah,
like,
I get. Yeah, yeah. Well, that
yeah,
that is like, yeah, that is the other comment you often hear. We want to get involved in decision making processes sooner.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I would still argue, like you said, that is probably still too vague. I don't
Yeah.
know. Would it
Yeah,
be?
what does involved mean?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So a conversation around these
Mm-hmm.
goals is really what we're trying to do when the goal feels too vague. We're trying to get out, what is it we're really trying to change? What is it do we want more of? What is it do we want less of? And as I hope everyone who's listening can hear from just you and I talking about this, it can go in so many different directions, and that depends on who the service design professional is, the
Mm.
team they're working with, the organization that they're a part of. So it can go in different directions, and that's fine. And it's the conversation that matters.
I'm curious. We are now exploring goals and sort of trying to formulate them and wrap our heads around what they are. Goals are strongly tied to measurements. Have you seen examples, or is this maybe the approach that you take, that you sometimes just start with a measurement and then sort of try to reverse engineer what the actual goal is?
Only in desperate situations, Mark. Because there are so many measures that are really easy to get that are floating around organizations, but the fact that they're easy to get just means the data was available.
Mm,
And
mm,
if nobody put any thought into the data that was available, what we end up doing is we don't
okay.
reverse engineer toward the correct goal.
Yeah.
We reverse engineer toward a goal that
Okay.
just makes the measurement relevant when it really may not be useful at all in what we're trying to achieve. But in desperate times, that can sometimes help, because what it does is it shows uh, what it takes for a measure to be useful. We have to have we have to be asking a really good business question that matters to us to make a measurement useful. And if we can't figure out what the really useful business question is, then it helps reinforce why measures can look really good,
Yeah.
be really easy to implement, but be utterly a waste of time.
Well, the classic example here, and I think this will be something that resonates with everybody who's listening. In our field, we have the Net Promoter Score. It seems that in every boardroom and everybody who thinks about customer experience, Net Promoter Score is the holy grail. But it's being implemented very mindlessly. It's like we need to let the score go up. Like that's the we have the measurement. It's easy to measure. We need to get the score going up, but it's rarely tied to an actual business goal. Is that something recognizable?
Yeah, absolutely recognizable. It's a perfect example, actually. It is a good measure. It is designed thoughtfully. It makes sense. It's got a data structure that makes it feasible to implement. But you're right, without the context of how it matters to our organization, it's just another KPI on the dashboard that we go, oh, yeah, sounds good. We really would like that to improve. Can you just make sure that they go and start improving that, please? But they're not that's not a strategic way to approach using information to make better business decisions. There are different reasons why Net Promoter Score would be useful for an organization. One is it's used as a proxy for customer loyalty or customer commitment. What do we want from our customers in terms of loyalty or commitment? How's that relevant to us? That would be the question to be exploring first to set a context for the relevance of Net Promoter Score. But the other side of it is if we have figured out that it's a useful measure for us, it certainly can't just stand alone and be the only piece of information that guides our decisions about our customer loyalty or commitment to us. So what's the deeper story? What are the drivers? Why do our customers feel loyal to us? What would they need to be more loyal to us if that's what we're looking for? And we end up finding that there are sub goals that sit underneath that, and therefore probably measures that are related to those sub goals that help become, like I mentioned before, the levers to pull to get the Net Promoter Score to improve. You can't directly make Net Promoter Score improve. You have to know what are the factors that drive it in your customers and set those specific goals unique to that.
Because otherwise it becomes very similar to let's launch 3 new services. The goal will become just launching it, and the goal here will become getting the score up. Like I sometimes joke when I hear this example, like let's just give all our customers $100 to give us a 10 out of 10 score with the NPS. That will make the score go up.
Sure will.
But that's apparent. I don't think that's the actual goal. One question I had here as well is the challenge that I see a lot of service design professionals face is that the goals that we focus on often span across multiple departments, are more systemic goals. When you are sort of let's call it a silo, when you are in a very specified activity within the organization, measuring things that are within your influence feels more manageable, feels more doable. And then we come in and we talk about things like journeys, things like experiences, things like loyalty, trust, which span like across a lot of different responsibilities. How do we approach that? Because that seems like a really big challenge.
I think there are three important pieces that I think really help lessen the challenge with that. One is to start with a map of how all of those different things relate together. If you've got your customer journey all mapped out, and you know that department affects this part of it, and that department affects that part of it, and there's kind of the silos intersect with that cross-functional journey. Mapping out the specific goals or results that we're trying to achieve throughout that journey and how to measure them, that would be step one. Forget about where the boundaries are, where the silos are. Just get the map of measures or information about that journey that really matters, the things that we're trying to improve about it. Step two would be then work out which functional area or team would be the natural, I was going to say owners, maybe I still mean owners, but which team is going to have the most influence over which parts of that, which goal measure combinations. And it could be that that even though one team would be the likely best owner of it, they may want to set up a cross-functional team across that customer journey where they can collectively monitor the measures about the customer journey and collectively have conversations about what are the priorities to improve next, and who should be involved in maybe a business experiment to try and improve something, or an actual improvement initiative or change project we're going to lock into. And those project teams themselves may also be cross-functional. So it's okay for ownership of parts of it to start in a functional area, but the interpretation and the action on improving that customer journey using the measures, that I think needs to be more collaborative and cross-functional in how we approach it.
And the challenge there is, and then we'll get into organizational culture and structures again, but the incentive structures often aren't aligned with cross-functional goals. They're often aligned with very narrow-oriented measures.
Personal KPIs, hitting personal quotas or things like that. That can only work when those individual KPIs, and often they are quotas. You hit so many of these in a period of time. They only work when they are chosen in the context of the more systemic measures that you mentioned, but more systemic goals and systemic measures, knowing that by encouraging this quota and having this person do more of that, it's going to contribute to the right thing. So rather than just somebody making lots of customer contacts to try and improve the relationship with the customer, they could have a quota for that. But if it's all done in the wrong way, maybe the customers don't appreciate having that many contacts. Maybe it's more about finding little insights to pass on to customers that are tailored to them. Maybe that's the quota that should be measured, not just the straight out number of communications. So it's got to be, when they're chosen in the context of the right bigger goals, the bigger systemic goals, that can work. But you're right, that it's not done that way. And that's why so much of it drives dysfunctional behavior and often erodes the goals that we really have, and does not help that net promoter score go in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I can give a simple example in my context as a business owner running a community. Fortunately, my team is relatively small and everybody understands the direction we're heading into. But like, I could very easily ramp up my lead generation and try to get as many new leads into the community as possible. But if somebody else, a different team, is responsible for reducing churn, like, they will worry about the quality of leads that I'm bringing in, right? I can get 1,000 new members, but if 900 out of them leave within a month, like, that's so, and that's where the friction is, right?
Yeah, because one thing is chosen without acknowledging how it needs to fit in and contribute with the system, with the bigger picture. That's it. But systems thinking is not easy, is it, Mark? I mean, we seem to be so constrained for time and resources and attention and mental bandwidth even, that we just go for the easy stuff to count, the easy stuff to monitor. And that is the huge risk. And it's not just a risk, it's an actuality that it does cause performance to erode rather than improve.
So how we break through that? Like, what are some strategies that you've seen that work?
It isn't easy for just anybody in an organization to create the paradigm shifts that are needed for this. It's got to be in the leadership team to do this, to lead this. They need to think that yes, our organization, our company is a system, and we need to map out the most important parts of the system and how those parts all work together. And we need to collaborate and to keep learning as we implement this systemic approach to goals and measures, because we're not going to get it right in theory, and it's only when we hit the ground that. So we need to have tolerance for experimentation and learning from failure and collaborating more. That's got to start with the leadership. It's not always possible, so whoever's listening to this, if that's not you, then where you start is by the kinds of questions that you ask the people around you when you're doing this. So if you're handed a KPI that you're pretty sure is going to have some dysfunctional effect, then you ask the question, what if I do a lot of this, what could be the good things about that, but what could be the bad things about that? If I do a lot of this, who else could be affected by it, and how might they be affected? So just asking questions to get more people becoming aware of these challenges, aware of these systemic interconnections that they may be ignoring. It's really the only place that you
Right.
can start when you're out there a lone wolf, and you're not in the leadership team, and you can't do it the right way. The right
Yeah,
way.
well, but this is already, at least from my perspective, quite practical. Asking these systemic questions and, like you mentioned before, visualizing a map, how things potentially influence each other. So if you get a specific target or quota, like you said, asking the question to your neighbor in the other department, like, okay, let's say I double my quota next month. Like, how would that impact you? Or what could you do? Is there something you could do to help me double my quota? Right?
Yeah.
That's quite a helpful and fruitful, meaningful conversation you can already start having instead of just jumping on the quota.
That's it. I know not much happens with pen and paper these days, but sometimes that's the easiest way
Sure.
to start these conversations, is sketch it out with somebody. And before you know it, you've got a systems diagram that's showing a whole lot of really powerful connections that need to be part of the choice of what my personal quota is going to be.
Yeah, but applying that systemic lens, that systemic perspective on, well, basically everything that you're doing, but especially the things that you're optimizing towards, like the numbers, the measurements that you're optimizing towards, that's already going to reveal either a lot of new insights or a lot of new questions that somebody
Both.
needs to answer. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay. Uh, we're thinking in goals. We're thinking in measurements. Now we move into targets.
Yeah. But not too quickly.
Okay.
We might have a really great measure designed for something, a way to quantify how soon service design is considered in business decision making. So it might be that at the moment it's not considered until after the budget's allocated, but we want it considered at least 2 steps before the budget's allocated. So we could measure that by understanding the business process steps and the key points at which we want it. So at the moment, 90% of service design ideas aren't considered until after the budget's set. And we want to reduce that down to maybe only 10%, or flip it
Sure.
round to the positive
Yeah.
we want. So there's a way to quantify it. But how can we set a target until we know how bad it is right now and how much better we can afford to make it? So we've really got to get that measure, bring it to life, and monitor it in a way that helps us understand where baseline is. Where are we now?
Mm,
When we understand where we are now, it makes it so much easier to aim for something better, not just pluck it out of thin air like we were talking about
sure.
before. So if our baseline at the moment is that only 10% of decisions take account of service design before the budget's set, that's a big shift we're looking for. So aiming for 90%, that might just be a little bit too much too soon. So with the context of knowing that baseline, we can then say, well, how about we try to double that. Let's go from 10% to 20% in the next 6 months and see what it takes to shift that. And if that turns out to be easier than we thought, then maybe we're not going to land at 20%. Maybe we're going to land straight away at 40%. And yay, let's celebrate that. But we have to do it to learn how hard or easy it is to make that shift. And then we can set more challenging targets after that. So targets got to happen in the context of a baseline, I guess.
Thank you for addressing that. This already brings up another challenge. We're facing so many challenges, Stacey, in the service design space, measuring stuff, because there are a lot of disciplines within organizations that have become standardized, that have a lot of academia, scientific perspectives looking into how to measure things, how to look at processes. When we get in as service design professionals, the things that we deal with often are human related. The right measurement systems, the right data often isn't even, I wanted to say, in place, but it's not even conceived of what it could be, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. How do we fix that?
Well, I'll start with a story, actually, because I think this illustrates it. Way back after I left university, I became a survey statistician because I studied statistics at university. And one of the applications of statistics is, believe it or not, in the design and execution of complex surveys. So not just the random thing you set up using SurveyMonkey and I'll just whack in there like 5 interesting questions and see what comes of it. No, this is proper survey design. And where that starts is by talking to our client about what they're trying to do. What are you trying to do that you don't know how to do now? So what questions are you asking that need to be answered? And in answering those questions, what forms of information do we need that are going to be capable of answering those questions? And for those forms of information that we need, what are the pieces of data that we're going to need to get to create that information? So this is what's missing in business is we just go, oh, we need to know more about why our customers aren't loyal. Let's create a loyalty survey and let's brainstorm some questions that we could ask. And maybe it's not all surveys. Sometimes it's other ways of collecting data, but it's all the same approach. Let's just brainstorm the kind of data that we want. So we end up with a whole lot of data that isn't useful. That's really wasting all of our data and our reporting efforts. Instead, what we've got to do, and at least in the context of measurement, okay, but I think the principles can apply beyond measurement, any kind of information. That's why we start with our goal. What goal do we really want to achieve? What is the best way to measure that goal so that we can be convinced of how well we're achieving it? And for that measure, how should we be calculating it? What will those measure values look like? What do they need to look like for us to answer the question? So maybe in the example before about the percentage of business decisions that take service design into consideration before the budget's set, maybe the percentage isn't actually the best way to measure that. Maybe it's more to do with how much time ahead of the budget decision that the service design gets considered. It's not just any time before the budget, but it's enough time before the budget. So I don't know, maybe we could measure that in number of days or number of steps in the, who knows,
Sure.
but it forces us to think about what is the information really got to look like that helps us answer the decision. And then we know how we're going to calculate that measure. And when we can write that calculation, then we know the data that we need. Sometimes that data exists and we didn't even realize it. Sometimes that data is not too hard to get and we just have to tweak a few things and we can get it. And other times we realize we've never thought this deeply about what we wanted to know. There is no data like this at all. We've got to really face a hard decision and decide, do we invest in getting this data now? Is it worth it? So it's got to start there, but it's all the thinking that's required to come down to being able to express in written form the formula to calculate those measures values. And that is the key to deciding the data that we need. Sometimes we've got to backpedal because the data is going to be too hard to get or too costly to get. And so we just tweak it a little bit so that it does become easier. But we don't make that decision too soon. We've got to look at what the information really should look like, what the measure calculation really should look like, what the data is we really need if we wanted that.
I'm curious. the way you're describing things, the only assumption we can make is that so much of the decisions that are being made inside organizations, people are just winging it. Like they're they're taking a best guess, and then crossing their fingers and hoping for the best. Is like, why is that?
It sounds like that, doesn't it? And
It
I
surely
think
does.
if we were cynical, we would say, yeah, nobody cares enough to try hard. They're just winging it. They're just trying to get through it as quickly as they can. I don't want to believe that. I want to believe that there are other people out there like me who are truth seekers, and not just truth seekers, but breakthrough seekers, people who really want to have an impact
Mm,
through what they do in their work or in their organization. So that's the kind of belief I have, is that there are people out there like that, truth seekers, breakthrough seekers, and they're not winging it because they couldn't be bothered doing anything else. They're winging it because they have no clue that there is a way to
yeah.
actually guide them to make it easier. And this is the struggle I've had ever since I started this career, is how to show people that it really isn't random. It really isn't something that has got to be recreated every time you try to do it. There is a process, there is a method that is just as stable and just as proven as the scientific method is that we use to create drugs or to keep airplanes in the air or do space travel. Science is behind that because science works. There is something that can be behind our decisions about goals and measures and improvement actions, that's stable, that we can rely on. So I think that's what's missing. They're winging it just because they don't know what
Mm,
that is. They don't know that there is one.
it sounds very recognizable. Okay. So where did we leave off? You mentioned baseline. We first have to understand what the current situation is before we can actually set a target.
Mm.
Um, we need to figure out how to get the baseline. What is it that we want to measure? Why do we want to measure that? Um, is there anything else?
What we get when we have we've gone through all the data, we've got the data that we need, we've found a way to get it, we've created our measure values, and we have charted it in a way that shows us what the baseline is. And we've then been able to set a meaningful target for it. Where we're at now is we have what I call a performance gap. And if our baseline for that measure of how soon we can get service design into decision making before the budget, if our baseline is that it's actually, let's say, 20 days after on average
Mm-hmm.
rather than
Mm-hmm.
before, then our target would be to have it maybe 20 days before the budget decision. And so our baseline is 20 days after, but our target is 20 days before. And there are ways to numerically put that on a chart. We've got a performance gap of 40 days. 40 days. We want to try to get decision makers to think about service design 40 days sooner on average than they currently do. Um, then the question is, we're very specific now, aren't we, about what we want to change? Super specific. So then we've got to say, well, how could we get that to change? How could we get decision makers to think about service design 40 days sooner than they do when they're making a new decision about something? And now we can get creative and start thinking of what ideas do we have? Like, why aren't they thinking about it sooner? Someone may say, well, it's just not embedded in the decision process that they're following. Well, maybe that could be something we do, is formalize it in the decision process. Or it could be that they just don't value it enough. Well, okay, well, that's a different problem to solve. How could we help decision makers value service design more so that they would consider it sooner? So we come up with a whole lot of propositions, I suppose, about things we could change. And as a team, knowing our organization, knowing our decision makers, knowing each other, we may decide on something and go, okay, let's fix this. And we put an action in place. We go, how long do we think this is going to take to have an effect? Well, okay, what we're doing here is we're going to go and talk to decision makers and help them understand the value of thinking of service design sooner. That's going to take us a couple of months. So we probably wouldn't expect to see a change for maybe 6 months. So what we're doing now is we're expecting something, and we're expecting in our measures chart that we will see a shift of the baseline moving closer to that target, but we're going to give ourselves some time to achieve it. So maybe 6 months before we expect to see that change. So now what we have is we know the levers to pull. We're doing experiments to test things and to learn more about how this whole thing works, about getting service design thought about early enough in decision making. Um, we've got our attention on the right kind of actions. So now we are exercising all that influence we said we wanted to have on getting things to change.
Great. I love this example. And I want to push back for a minute because I think this is getting at the root struggle. Like the 40 days is a very tangible example. A tangible example would also be we want to get NPS from a 7 to an 8. It feels very, like you said, scientific, measurable. Often, the things that we tend to work on are, like you said, systemic. So, who knows? Maybe a shift happens in a different department. I don't know, a manager gets fired. There are so many moving parts. We're getting into causality and correlation here. And that feels like very uncomfortable saying, are the actions that we have taken actually moving the measure? Or is it because the sun is shining and we are hitting our revenue goals that everybody is more open to innovate? Help us out.
The random things like the sun is shining, or people are in a good mood about innovation, or so and so left the organization last month, they're random things that might create a blip in the measure that we're tracking. We're looking for changes that don't create a blip, but create a shift that stays shifted. So it's kind of almost about the word is escaping me. Hang on. I think sustainable is probably the word I'm looking for. A sustainable change, not something that suddenly it makes the measure look good, but then it's back down bad again. We're looking for a shift that is sustainable. And it's hard for people to imagine what that looks like, because when they look at a KPI, they're always seeing things go up and down all over the place. And they know that's because there's a whole bunch of random little things affecting it all the time. But I'm a statistician, I guess, so I have a statistical kind of view on the world. And I think if statistics is anything, it's the study of variability, of variation. Not all variation's random. Not all variation is just caused by someone being in a good mood, the sun shining, someone losing their job, a new manager coming in, whatever. There is another part of variation that's non-random. And the study of statistics is what helps us understand that. There is one little, from all the statistics I did in my career, there is one little piece of it that we use in our measurement approach. And I call it a smart chart. And it's based in statistical theory that's been proven over 100 years. But that smart chart helps people see their measure in a way that sifts out the random noise that they shouldn't be worried about, and to look at the signal variation, the variation that's saying, you've just made a sustainable shift in this. You can attribute this to what you did.
Okay.
How much more do I go into that?
Well,
in our conversation?
No,
it's there's a little bit of theory that's needed to understand that and to know it, but it's easy theory.
And the good thing is it's out there. I think we're again touching upon some cultural aspects here, because what you're describing, sustainable change, seeing actual patterns and trends emerge, that takes time. And if I listen to the people who are actually doing the work, the horizons are like 3 months, 6 months at best. Like, it's really hard to quote unquote prove the fact that your actions are having an impact on those short horizons. Would you agree?
Sometimes, yeah, that's true. But it can be because there's a mismatch between how we're measuring, how frequently we're measuring, how frequently we can measure, versus how quickly we're expecting a change. There is a relationship between those two things. If that relationship is out of whack, um, it's not going to work. People are going to be frustrated. So when you have something that you need to have a change within a 3 to 6 month time period, you've got to first know, well, is that even reasonable to change something and know that the change we made has a lasting effect in that time period? And if the answer is yes, yeah, yeah, this is something we can change next week. And we should be able to see things. We should know that there's a difference after a few
Mm,
weeks. You've got to measure weekly. You can't measure
right,
monthly or quarterly
exactly.
to try and detect a change that can happen that quickly. But then there are other cases where, you want to change something like customer loyalty. That doesn't change in a matter of weeks. That's a slow moving beast, that one.
Mm.
And it needs time. It needs a lot of input to get a lasting change in it. So to set a goal to shift NPS within 3 to 6 months in a significant way, in a lasting way, that's a recipe for disappointment, I think. In most cases, it's going to take longer to shift it just because of how heavy it is to shift.
We're already over 50 minutes into this conversation, but I do want to double click on one more thing that you just mentioned. And that is, yes, we do often see those lofty goals like improving customer loyalty, improving NPS, and they take a long time to shift, like you said. What ha- have you seen ways to give people the confidence, stamina, patience in that time that it takes to actually shift those larger goals?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Um,
what is that?
we can't magically change how long it takes to shift those goals. But this is, if we're coming full circle, Mark, we're coming back to this idea that there's a system of measures in an organization. There's the higher level strategic ones, and they tend to be the ones that take a long time to shift. That's usually where you'll see NPS is up in, a strategic against a strategic goal. Then we'll have the tactical level and the operational level. Of course, I'm oversimplifying it by
Sure.
giving it those names, but hopefully it helps bring it to life a bit better. Um, we can generally measure the lower level operational type things more frequently. And if we have built a cause effect line of sight from those operational things through to the higher level via the tactical ones, then to shift one of the tactical ones, we could be moving 6 or 7 of the operational ones. And they're the clues that we are making progress on the higher level one, is when those lower level ones are making positive shifts through our action.
And that cause and effect map overview is something I would say that it's almost always missing. Nobody takes the effort, the time, or has the courage to say that these things are related. That this, if we do this, it will move something else without having proof upfront. Like you have to, yeah, you have to make some assumptions. Some, yeah,
We haven't given any how to about this. So if there's one little tip that I can leave with listeners about this, is to Google pump results map. And what you will see is exactly what we're talking about, this systemic map of goals and measures and how they can work. You'll hopefully Google will show you maybe a couple of how-to articles about it, but also some case studies and examples of how they work. That will bring all of this together.
so yes, I that is actually how I learned about you through the
Yeah,
result map. Yeah, for sure. I still
I'd
remember, and
forgotten that.
and that encouraged me to reach out because I absolutely saw the value for our community there. You mentioned we haven't really dived deep into the how to. That's not possible in an hour conversation. But like I said at the start, for a long time in your career, you worked with large organizations, big teams, trying to implement and trying to get them to understand how this works, how they can systematically implement this within their organizations. I think right now you're also working and developing and launching something that is, it's not the right word, but more accessible to individual professionals. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's that?
What you're referring to, what we have been doing all this time up till now, is there's the pump evidence-based leadership for leaders to set this kind of a direction for measurement and strategy. The pump blueprint, which gives people the thorough skills to build measurement systems that do handle the cross-functional stuff and get teams collaborating and all that kind of thing. But not everyone can start with that. And so for any one person that just wants to learn the essential bits that, like we've been talking about today, the essential bits of how to measure a goal in a way that gives you leverage to achieve it, then now we have Pump Lite. So that's Lite. And that is a much shorter program. It's much less about training and instruction and more about learning through lots of examples and learning by doing. And so it's kind of a guided program. And the key of it is that you pick one goal and you take it through Pump Lite. And that will help you absorb the skills, practice them, achieve one really good, well, you'll close a performance gap for that goal. Now that we've talked about performance gaps, I can say that. Get that done and then repeat. Do it for the next goal and do it for the next goal. And you can do it with a little team if you want to, or you can do it on your own. But the idea is that we can just get those essential micro skills of using measurement to achieve goals embedded in the easiest, fastest way possible.
Awesome. I'm excited. We'll talk more about that in our Circle community as well. But for anyone who isn't yet part of the Circle community, where can they learn more about this program and potentially even sign up, which I would encourage people to do?
Yeah, pump.academy/pumplite. That's the place to go. So pump.academy is the home of Pump, and /pumplite, PUMPLITE, and that'll be all the information about it. We've got a program coming up this November, but depending on when people listen to this, there could be other programs scheduled on that page as well.
And is there a cool November 2025 in this case? Is there anything that you'd like to say to the people listening right now, sort of a call to action to sign up? Or
because I like you so much, Mark, and I love the work that you do, your listeners can have 10% off. There's a coupon code they can use, which is SDS10. So Service Design Show is the SDS inspiration. So SDS10. And that's a 10% off for the program coming up in November.
Awesome. I hope it will sell out in no time, because I do think that these skills, like you said, I really like the word leverage, that give you leverage within the work that you're doing. And we're all looking for that. So that's awesome. Stacey, I'm pretty sure that we'll complete the trilogy one day, and that we'll get into maybe all the organizational and cultural stuff that we didn't get into today. Maybe that's part 3 of our conversation. But for today, I just have one more question for you. And that is, if you could leave us with something to think about after this episode, when we go walking the dog, take a shower, like what's the thing that you'd say is useful for our time?
Those listening to this could start thinking more about the impact they really want to make, either through their own work or through the work they do with their team. That can sometimes be the shift to understand why we need goals and why measurement helps us get that leverage, because the impact is so very important and intrinsically rewarding, at the very least, when we exercise our influence in achieving it.
So if you would frame that as a question?
As a question, what impact do you really wish you could make through your work that keeps eluding you? You're stuck and you're just not sure how to make it.
Awesome question to wrap our minds around. Stacey, to be continued. Again, we'll see each other in the Circle community, and who knows, maybe in part 3 of the Service Design Show. For now, this is all the time we had for this conversation. Congratulations on launching Pump Lite. I'm really excited about that. So thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom again with us.
I absolutely love it, Mark. Thank you so much for the opportunity to collaborate with you again.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. For me, this conversation really gets to the heart of what it means to be a mature professional in our field. We can't just talk about journeys and experiences. We need the tools to show how they connect and what impact they're truly having. This becomes especially critical as we move into practices like journey management, where we are responsible for outcomes over time. Stacey's approach provides that clarity, and her new Pump Lite program sounds like a perfect starting point for anyone looking to build that muscle. A huge thanks to Stacey for being so generous with her wisdom once again. I really hope this gives you the confidence to start that first measurement experiment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, you can do me one big favor. Click the like button on this video and make sure to leave a short comment if you haven't done so already. Not to feed the algorithms, but just to let me know whether or not we are on the right track by addressing topics like this. Finally, before we part ways, please take a moment to reflect and most of all celebrate that by joining us today, you have directed your attention towards learning and growing as a professional. So, from everyone who you are going to impact through your work, thank you for taking the time and making the commitment. My name is Mark Fontijn and I look forward to having you with us again for a new conversation on the Service Design Show. Take care and see you soon.